The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Welcome in, everybody, and Merry Christmas to one and all. Happy New Year in advance. Kip Kiefer on TKR with this week's edition, just 2 days before Christmas 2024. A lot of people will tell you that we feel like Christmas already came along about a month ago, or a month and a half ago now, on November 5th, Election Day. It was beginning to look a lot like Christmas when the most fraudulent administration that ever has occupied the White House, the Biden-Harris administration, was thoroughly beaten in the election by the Trump campaign, Donald Trump president-elect, and he has been more than president-elect because in the last couple of months, Donald Trump has made more policy than the absentee president, Joe Biden, who's been chilling at one of his Delaware estates almost the entire time since his protege, Kamala Harris, who was his replacement, of course, as he was thrown out of office unceremoniously, but deservedly. The fact and I don't know. It's Christmas season. I'm not going to get on a real negative roll here today. I've been chastised because of my dissatisfaction with how the college football playoffs been happening. People are starting to say, I was told you got to stop hating. I'm not hating anybody. I that is not in my DNA. I don't hate, but I certainly point out the lunacy of situations when merited. And the entire last 4 years, going all the way back to the 2020 election, and all of the emergency procedures that were put into place that led to Joe Biden and his resounding win over Donald Trump, where anybody who'd been paying attention, and this is not a recent phenomenon, it's what I want to talk about today because I think it's already a Christmas gift. But if you've been listening to this show for the last couple of years, you've been given a gift every week of me pointing out to people that aren't paying attention exactly what we were dealing with. It's incredible that this past week, it's about a week ago now, that the Wall Street Journal put out what's being called blockbuster expose of the last 4 years in the Biden White House. A blockbuster article. It's not a blockbuster. Anybody paying even casual attention knew exactly what was happening there. This was a guy who was supposedly had the reputation as kind of a blood and guts, all-American, average Joe Biden, who had kind of a centrist reputation, which was undeserved. Joe Biden does not have ideology. Joe Biden is a politician who's been in Washington for 50 years plus. He's never had a job. He's been a politician his whole career. Remember the old adage, those who can do, those who can't teach? Well, I always thought that was unfair because there are some people that really adopt that avocation and want to educate others and be a contributor to young lives or lives that are trying to better themselves from a scholarly or an intellectual standpoint or just, in other fields of study. There are wonderful teachers out there. I always thought that was unfair. I think the cliche needs to be revised now. Those who can do, those who can't politic, because that is the ultimate position where people occupy space who don't really have any particular talents, only have the motivation to aggrandize and enrich themselves. And that's what American politics has become. So my wish, my Christmas wish, and the gift I would like to receive is to see this administration coming in, the Trump administration, completely reverse the course of what we have allowed to happen. And it's all of our fault. It's my fault. It's your fault. It's anybody who's not been involved in the political and electoral process's fault. We keep sending the same bums back to Washington year after year after year. The founding fathers had no concept that anybody could choose to be a professional politician for a living. In Alabama, right here, we've got the primary example. Richard Shelby was a United States Senator from Alabama for 36 years, 6 terms, 6-year terms. He finally got to the point where I'm sure he wanted to run again, because that's the only time anybody in Alabama ever saw him or heard from him was on election time. He'd go to Washington and basically melt into the exterior, not do anything, not say anything, not create anything controversial. It's just a guy who just blended in, voted pretty much along party lines, but also was a prime example of what I've been preaching here for a couple of years, that this is not Republican Democrat, because Richard Shelby is about as conservative a Republican as you could have, but he still became a major player in the Washington deep state swamp. It's Washington and that bureaucracy against every American person outside of the beltway of Washington, Northern Virginia. That's how it is. That is indisputable. I've been telling you that for a couple of years. This is not ideology. This is not politics in terms of the pure Republican, Democrat, different philosophies. This is people that are in the greatest positions ever, in the biggest growth industry ever conceived by man, a government that takes in billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And when they come up short for the spending sprees that they want to have, which are all inspired by who's putting money in their pocket and trying to curry favor with voters so they can keep their worthless positions, that it is the greatest. When I hear people say it's public service, it's the most laughable thing ever, because it's not public service. It is 100% self-service. We have got a responsibility as Americans, and it's my greatest Christmas wish in Christmas 2024, that people wake up, look at these people that they continue every year to send back to Washington, particularly in the Senate and the House of Representatives, where the rate in terms of their popularity are in the teens, a lot of times the low teens. I saw a 12 or 13% approval rate for Congress at some point this past year. 12 or 13%. That means that if you talk to 100 Americans, 87 of them say Congress sucks. They're not doing the job. They're not representing my interests. And yet, we continue in all of these districts all over the country to send the same people back to Washington election after election. It's almost like, yeah, I totally disapprove of Congress, but my guy's awesome. Your guy is not awesome. You're putting them back in the club that is making all of these decisions, and none of them are for your benefit. It is for their own benefit. Again, a lot of the things they support and sponsor are spurred on by the unbelievable amount of money coming from the military complex, the pharmaceutical companies, the big tech companies, other major manufacturers. The pharmaceuticals are the worst offenders, stuffing money into people's pockets that are in representative positions in Washington and currying their favor and their support to all of the things that are on their agendas. All of them have teams of lobbyists in Washington. And their job is 100% the same thing, to influence the decision making of congressmen and senators to benefit their entities. And that is the name of the game. You've got that, and you've got people back in their own states, wherever they're representative of, they come up with pet projects. The most blatant example we just saw last week, Washington did not get the memo of the mandate from the American people on November 5th. Washington thinks they're above the people's opinion. They don't care. They don't care. They are going to continue to try and run this well-oiled machine of the ultimate self-service to its absolute extent. And it's amazing to me that more people don't react like I have, and I'm going to share that with you now. Last week, which once again, you have to understand, in our country, the fiscal year ends September 30th. That means from a budgetary standpoint, from a cash flow standpoint, that is when the year ends. It's not January 1st that it starts. It's December 31st that it ends. It's not that way. It's a fiscal year. It's October to the end of September. That's where all the financial decisions are made. And every year, Congress is required before October 1st to have 12 different funding mechanisms prepared that address all kinds of different areas, from government benefits to the military to all of the different departments. There are 12 different funding bills. That work is supposed to take place during the year leading up to the end of the fiscal year, which is on September 30th. I don't know how many years in a row now that has not been done. It is always dry docked and postponed and punted down the road, because initially every year right around the middle of September, you see the same tremors in Washington. We don't have a funding mechanism to fund the federal government. So they get into it, they get into this emergency mode, and they put together some ridiculous bill that calls for a continuing resolution. That's what it's called. It means we're going to just keep going. We're going to fund at the current level. We're going to allocate more money, a lot of times that we don't have, to continue to fund the government, because the government shutdown, well, that's inconceivable. A government shutdown, oh my God, there's nothing worse than that, because senators and congressmen, they might not get paid. And federal employees, I love how they say a lot of hardworking Americans are going to really be hurt by this. These are the hardworking Americans in the federal government right now that only 11% have returned to work on a daily basis since 2020 COVID year. They're all sitting around in their pajama pants at home doing whatever it is they do. And here is my favorite line, and you can frame this one, put it on your wall. This is the Kip Keefer line of the year from some social media posts I had this week, because I had somebody say, well, even if the government gets shut down, it doesn't affect any of the, get ready for it, essential employees of the federal government, the emergency folks, people that have to be monitoring our safety and security. The essential personnel is not affected. So let's dissect that statement. So the essential personnel is still compensated somehow when the government isn't even officially funded. And that leaves the non-essential personnel. If you say the essential personnel is taken care of, what other way to look at it? That everybody else is non-essential. Well, here's the question. If they're non-essential, Why in the hell do they have a job in the federal government? Sitting around in their pajama pants in their basement, playing video games, watching movies, doing whatever they're doing instead of going to the office and working and earning a salary for their non-essential positions. If that doesn't define exactly the arrogance of the federal government, that, well, essential employees are compensated, everybody else is going to be unduly affected. If they're not essential, why in the hell are they working in the government? Why do we have 90,000 people in Washington right now directly employed by the government? Why do we have hundreds of thousands more that are contractors and consultants that are doing a lot of the so-called work for the government? It's the biggest mess ever. And I just love the fact that Donald Trump has brought in Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, two of the most, youngest, most brilliant business people in the world, and they are on board now. So this continuing resolution happened at the end of September, protecting all of the people that work for the government. And then we get to the end of the calendar year, and then the frenzy begins anew, because once again, that deal that's made right around the 1st of October to keep things funded expires at the end of the calendar year. So at midnight on a couple of days ago, it was the deadline that they had to fund the government and all the other programs again. And what did they do? Well, they did what they always do. They took their entire wish list, because this is an important component to keep the government running, to keep it funded, and they produced a 1,500-page bill that people were given one day to look at and read, and then they were supposed to, before the deadline at midnight, they had to pass this bill, or everything was going to just be in total disarray. It was going to be this terrible situation. And the 1,500-page bill, Elon Musk, who is a brilliant businessman with his staff, looked at it, found all kinds of, it wasn't about funding the government. Sure, that was mentioned in there, but it contained all kinds of pork, all kinds of special pet projects, millions and millions of your tax dollars going to every kind of unbelievable, wasteful, ridiculous pet cause that all of these congressmen and senators are getting checks from people, getting calls from people, all of the protections of all of their pets, all of these monster multi-gazillion dollar companies, that there's all this pork in there, all these additional millions in spending. There were some other essential things in there, like coming up with money for the people that were so affected by these storms and hurricanes, that the Mayorkas, who is the worst political appointee ever in charge of Homeland Security, which has FEMA under their column, said a couple months ago, we don't have any money to give you because the government hasn't funded us yet. So they put a lot of that in there to give them we're funding the government and we're coming up with money for the storm victims, which should have been a no-brainer, should have been done months ago. People are still living in tents in Western North Carolina. It's absolutely abominable that this government finds millions and millions, and some cases billions of dollars to ship overseas, and we can't take care of our people who are the government. It's of the people, by the people, for the people. They're living in tents because the government and FEMA, under the control of Alejandro Mayorkas, who also controls the Secret Service, a whole bunch of other agencies, Homeland Security, the TSA. We don't have any money because the government hasn't funded us yet. So they put all this in that bill, but there's all this pork. And what's even worse, there are hundreds of pages of policy changes that are not, they're not, they're contentious. They're not really negotiated. They're just thrown into this bill So you either approve this 1,500-page bill or the government's going to shut down and it's going to be terror in the streets. I say, so what? Let's shut the government down. That means the essential employees are still compensated. The government is still providing somehow for the things that they're committed to doing. But all of these people who are just sucking on the teat of the American system and not contributing anything, if the essential people are taken care of, what what does that mean for everybody else that's collecting a check for not going to the office and not doing anything? They are non-essential. They need to go. This government needs to be shrunk and shrunk dramatically. Non-essential, see ya. Go get a job. Get a real job. That's what people used to say. And it's never been truer than right now. That's what this movement is all about. And Elon Musk has caught so much flack for pointing out how ridiculous this continuing resolution, with all of this additional spending for pet projects, with all this money being funneled in to the to weapons producers, tanks, planes, helicopters, to fund these giant complex companies, military complex companies, the pharmaceuticals, the techs companies, all the things I mentioned. For him to point that out and to point out all of the policy stuff. What is policy doing in these bills? Ask yourself that question. Here's one of them in the policy area. The January 6th committee, who investigated Donald Trump with prime time hearings, which we've never seen before, and ABC retired executive producing these things to try to give them glitz in show business, as abominable as that was, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. The January 6th committee suppressed and destroyed tons of evidence that would completely dispute and blow up their whole position that this was some great insurrection engineered by Donald Trump. It was all more get Trump things because Trump coming back is their worst nightmare. They tried everything. And the biggest offender in that group was a quote Republican, Liz Cheney. And what was up her backside was the fact that Donald Trump had the gall to criticize her father, Dick Cheney, who was one of the absolute most atrocious people to ever work in government. I don't care what his party designation was. Dick Cheney was just a horrible person from the standpoint of decision making and what was best for the country. He was all about Dick Cheney and all about the agenda. And the fact that Trump had the audacity to criticize her lionized, father who did such selfless service for this country, she just went on a crusade to try and completely destroy Trump. And this bill to continue the government, there's all this policy stuff about immunity to people in Congress, that if there's any kind of request to get any information, any internal communications like emails or texts or any of that. We saw the same thing in the FBI scandal with Strzok and Page, who had over 500 texts back and forth, basically giving a play-by-play how the FBI was trying to sync Trump with the phony Russia investigation. As American people, we just seem to ignore all those things and forget about them a couple of weeks later. So this bill contained all of this theft, giving the Congress, if they did try to investigate, because now it's a Republican Congress, and this was a Democrat-led charge with the prominent feature of a Republican, Liz Cheney, running the show. But this bill was going to prohibit or was going to make them immune and not require them to turn over subpoenaed materials. What in the hell is that doing in this spending bill to try and keep the government going and keep important services going on? It was all just thrown in there, and that's just one example of so many of things, hundreds of pages in this 1,500-page bill. And Mike Johnson, the head of the Speaker of the House negotiated supposedly and reached an agreement that was going to be the legislation that was going to be voted on. Elon Musk got word to Trump right away that this thing stinks to high heaven. It's absolutely not the way that we need to go. It's the same old crap that they do every single year. This is how they get a lot of laws passed without even really debating them or having agreement. Everybody in Washington wants to go home for Christmas. They don't care what the bill is. As long as they fund the government, they can get the hell out of there and not come back till January. And it would have just sailed right through if, thank God, Elon Musk wasn't there to look at it, alert Trump, and they stopped it. It got cut down to 118 pages to basically just do the bare bones of funding the government. There were some compromises in there. The disaster people got money. Some farmers got some much needed relief. And this typical Washington who did not get the memo of the will of the American people. Almost 80% say the country's going the wrong direction. We need major upheaval, major overhaul. And I wish, my Christmas wish is two things. One, that all of you listening and everybody else in this country will wake up. Let's send some different people. Let's send some successful people. The backlash against Elon Musk, one New York congresswoman, well, nobody voted for him. What a gall. What business does he have to interfere with the government of the United States? There's been all kinds of left-wing publications saying Trump already delivering chaos in Washington. They consider chaos anybody who says this is wrong. This is not how we need to run this government. We don't need to print money. We don't need to just dole it out to everybody that's supporting us and everybody that's giving money back to us. That's chaos to them. Anybody who's interrupting the machine and disrupting the way things have always been done in the immediate past in our country. We have gotten to a appalling point of these people feeling so entitled and so comfortable in these positions that they are outraged if anybody rocks that boat. And the boat doesn't need to be rocked. It needs to be torpedoed and sunk. This needs to stop. This government needs to be cut down to its barest elements just to provide the services and protection and security that the American people deserve. And that's exactly what my greatest wish is for this country and for all of you and all of your children and all of your grandchildren and future descendants. This can be the greatest country in the world, but we have, with our heads stuck in the sand, have let it be hijacked by a bunch of self-opportunists, and it's got to stop now. That's my wish for the holiday season. My other fervent wish is for all of you to have a wonderful and just celebratory, great observance. Enjoy your friends, especially your family. There's nothing that compares to this time of year. Be giving, be charitable. The American people are always great at that. I just wish we would all wise up and get on board with this and get our government in shape and get these people that have been not in public service, but in self-service out. There's a lot of good jobs available for greeters at Walmart or, people that can drive Uber deliveries, Uber Eats. There's all kinds of good jobs out there for these people that, again, changing the cliche, people that can do, people that can't get into government. It's time for them to get a real job and get back to what this country was founded upon: states' rights, individual rights, and you and me being the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Merry Christmas, everybody. We'll come to you next week before the New Year's and give you our end-of-year message and our 2025 outlook. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to TKR and Tony Kurre. I'm Kip Kiefer. Merry Christmas, everybody.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.